Fiona Bruce is in the chair for question time.
There has to be a general election within months, and where we are tonight may be a good indicator of whether the country is ready for a change in government. We are in Stoke-on-Trent, the heart of England's so-called Red Wall, Labour's traditional heartlands, but where last time many voters switched their allegiance, helping the Conservatives to convincing victory at the last election. That was 2019. Remember, Boris, get Brexit done, when each of Stoke's 3 constituencies voted Conservative, undoing decades of Labour dominance. Could the mood now be shifting? But our audience here, as always, is a broad reflection of the electoral picture across the country. Welcome to Question Time. On our panel tonight, as always, a wide range of views from the government. Making his Question Time debut, the Treasury Minister Nigel Huddleston. He's Financial Secretary to the Treasury, meaning he has overall responsibility for the UK tax system. Labour's Shadow International Development Secretary is Lisa Nandy. She's been MP for Wigan since 2010. In that time, she shadowed the Foreign Secretary, Energy and Levelling Up briefs. Grace Blakely is an author, commentator and journalist, mostly on economic and political affairs. In her most recent book, Vulture Capitalism, she explains why free markets only benefit the rich and why our democracy doesn't work very well. And Humphrey Cobbold is head of the Pure Gym chain of fitness centres, born in Kenya and raised here in Staffordshire. He's in charge of 600 gyms across the world with over 2 million members. Good evening. Welcome to our panellists. Welcome to our audience here in Stoke. Very good to see you. And, of course, welcome to you at home. You can watch the programme in all sorts of ways, on BBC Sounds, on iPlayer, and there's always a lively debate going on online. In fact, it starts every Wednesday when we announce the panel. So if you want to join in, feel free to do so. Now, let's listen to our first question tonight, which is from Ian Mycock.
Will Natalie Elphicke be an asset to the Labour Party or a liability?
Lisa Nandy, Natalie Elphicke, obviously MP for Dover, a Conservative until 2 days ago, now a member of the Labour Party, and that has been to some consternation, I think it's fair to say, among a number of Labour MPs. An asset or a liability, Lisa?
Well, look, I think it's a very welcome thing that she's chosen to come across and join our benches and to vote with us to protect people from the worst of this Tory havoc over the next few months and to try and bring about a general election. I think over and over again, we've had by-election after by-election over the last 12 months, and I think people are crying out for the chance to choose change and to start rebuilding this country again. And I completely...
So an asset, then? I mean, this is a woman who described Keir Starmer as Sir Softy and criticised Labour's policy on small boats, saying they're not serious about stopping small boats, tackling criminality or protecting people from smuggling gangs. She's an asset. Well,
look, I obviously completely disagree with that, and she says that she does now too. But the most important thing for me is that there is nobody in this country that can force a general election except Rishi Sunak or votes in Parliament, and we don't have the votes in Parliament in order to make that happen. I just don't know how I would go home to Wigan and say to my constituents who are sitting on NHS waiting lists, waiting for badly needed operations, people who are bringing up kids in damp, overcrowded, mouldy housing, who don't have the time to wait for Rishi Sunak to get on and call that general election, that we'd rejected somebody from coming and sitting on our benches, taking the Labour whip and voting with us to try and bring about that change that the country so desperately needs.
And let me just ask you, you could see that a lot of Conservative MPs as well as Labour MPs were very surprised when they suddenly saw us sitting behind Keir Starmer. Was that the first you knew of it as well?
It was, actually. I mean, you know, these things tend to be very tight conversations and quite difficult negotiations.
So did you think, I never saw that coming?
No, I would just say as well that actually, no, there's a lot of disquiet on the Conservative benches, as you can imagine. But what I think is really important is that, you know, it does take a lot to cross the floor. Whichever direction you do it in, it does take a lot. And I think the views that she expressed when she did so, when she said that this country just can't take any more of this Conservative government, I think she is speaking for a lot of people at the moment. And you know, I'm grateful to her for agreeing to help to bring about that change. But most of all, I'm grateful to the very many people who looked at us 5 years ago, thought that we'd left them and that they'd lost their trust in us, and are starting to look again and are starting to think that they might put that trust in us and take that same step. And I promise you that if you do that, we won't let you down.
Nigel, so the question is, will Natalie Elphicke be an asset to the Labour Party or a liability? I mean, you obviously must have thought she was an asset to the Conservative Party, so I guess you think she's going to be an asset for them as well?
Well, I believe she was an asset because I believe she shared our values, and I think she probably still does if you look at the comments that she's made and what she said on social media and her statements in the House of Commons. I mean, it's always sad when a colleague defects. It's not unusual.
I mean, it's the second one in 2 weeks now.
Well, true, but it goes both ways. I mean, Lisa Cameron joined the Conservative Party last year, and Churchill crossed the chamber twice. But I would say...
I mean, that is going back some considerable way.
But I say it's not uncommon. But I think I would say this. I think concern amongst Conservative MPs about Natalie Elphicke leaving the Conservative Party is as of nothing compared to the concern in the Labour Party about Natalie Elphicke joining Labour, because I don't believe for 1 minute that most Labour MPs believe that she shares her values. And if you just look at the quotes, you know, Labour would take the country backwards on Brexit. Don't trust Labour on immigration. Labour back fewer and weaker border controls.
She's also said the
Conservatives
have become a byword for incompetence and division.
Well, I think it's... You know,
do you agree with that as well?
Well, with the greatest respect, if you are crossing the chamber, you're probably causing part of that division. But I would say, look, the reality is she's laid out a lot of opposers. She's spoken again and again against Keir Starmer, against Labour in a really visceral way. And I think many of those comments, you'll be Conservative Party leaflets quoting her as a Labour MP now. I think it shows poor judgment on the part of Keir Starmer to accept somebody into his party who clearly, transparently does not share her values. So, you know, to be honest, I don't think it's going to end well for Labour.
Do you think she will be the last Conservative MP to cross the floor?
Well, I certainly hope so, because...
Are you expecting any more defections?
I mean, I have to say, you know, we talk about divisions, but what you don't comment on is the 330 incredibly loyal Conservative MPs who are fighting day in, day out to win a general election, because this next election is really, really serious. Our children and grandchildren's future is at stake, and we believe vehemently in making sure that we sustain a viable future for them with a Conservative government. So I can say that actually there is a great deal of commonality amongst Conservative MPs, and you will see us coming out fighting in this election.
A great deal of commonality. I mean, 2 have defected in 2 weeks, but OK, we hear what you're saying. We've got lots of hands up. The woman in the red top there. No, a little bit towards the side, yeah.
Do you think whoever gets in on the next election, are they going to be full of promises like everyone else has been, full of promises, and then as soon as they get in, that's it? They don't carry the promises over.
OK, I will put that question in a minute. Man in the white shirt, yeah.
The former Conservative MP has criticised Keir Starmer and said she won't stand at the next election. So how wise is it of Keir Starmer to accept her so openly?
OK. And I'm going to... Yes, the man next to you. Just a little bit further along.
Personally, I think it's a betrayal of the constituents who voted for her as a Conservative MP. I mean, I like football. If I go to a football match and watch the players in blue, and halfway through when they're losing, they put a red shirt on and play for the opposition, I'd be very angry as a fan, and I think the voters should be very angry too.
I mean, footballers do switch allegiances, of course. And
not during the game.
No, not during the game. No, that really would be something, my goodness me. OK, well, look, Grace... Ian's question is, will Natalie Elphicke be an asset to the Labour Party or a liability? And I wonder if you might address the woman's question there about
definitely.
Whoever gets in, will they be full of promises which actually won't amount to, you know...
Yeah, look, I think what's interesting about this is that anyone who's criticised Labour recently has been told, you're just trying to get the Tories in, and here's Keir Starmer literally getting the Tories into his own party. And this isn't just any Tory. As we've heard, she's, you know, pretty right-wing. She's made some bad comments about Starmer. She's also made some pretty terrible comments about the victims of her ex-husband's sexual assault. And I mean, just imagine if you are a sexual assault survivor looking at this image of Elphicke sitting behind Keir Starmer, what are you going to think? Are you going to think, I'm able to trust this party?
I mean, I should point out, Grace, as you know, that she she has now apologised.
She's apologised, yeah, which, again, an interesting double standard there, right? She said something pretty terrible and she apologised, and Keir Starmer has welcomed her open arms into the Labour Party. Diane Abbott, a while ago, said something that she regretted that was wrong. She apologised, and she is still not inside the Labour Party. This is a woman who receives more abuse than any other MP, a woman who has been a long-serving Labour MP. And I just find that double standard really, really upsetting, actually. And I think it speaks to the point that the lady made about, can we really trust politicians? I think this actually sits at the core of our democracy right now. Trust in political parties is at all-time lows because people see politicians making promises and then going into Westminster and saying, oh, it's actually too difficult, there's no money left, we can't do any of the things that we promised you. And it's, I think, a really cynical move on the part of our politicians just to say, you know, that we couldn't possibly fulfil these promises that we've been making to people. Even more cynical not to even make the promises in the first place, as I think Keir Starmer is failing to do, because you basically say either there's not enough money left to fix the NHS or I'm going to encounter too much opposition, I can't possibly do anything. We have gone through in this parliament, this has been the first parliament in modern history where living standards have fallen. And that comes on the back of the longest period of wage stagnation since the 1800s. People are desperate for change. And if politicians don't deliver that, I'm worried about the future for our democracy.
And Grace, I'm right in saying, am I not? That you have long, certainly under Corbyn, were a Labour supporter. Will you be voting Labour at the next election?
I left the Labour Party over its stance on Gaza. It was after Keir Starmer's LBC interview where he said that he basically thought that Israel had the right to cut off water and electricity to Gaza, which I think now is very clear constitutes a war crime. But that is not the only reason I've got. I'm also really disappointed with the dropping of the £28 billion pledge to invest in decarbonisation. I'm disappointed in the fiscal rules and the fact that we're not considering raising any taxation on the wealthy, on big businesses. I'm disappointed in the watering down of the one last good thing that was there, which was the New Deal for workers. I'm just looking at Keir Starmer now, and even as someone who I'm not going to vote for him, but I'm like, what's left?
Humphrey?
Yeah, well, if I could pick up first on the point on betrayal that was made, and I was thinking exactly of the football analogy. For my sins, I'm an Arsenal fan, and I remember when Sol Campbell came across from Spurs, he turned out to be a big asset for us. I suspect a bigger asset for Arsenal than Natalie will prove to be for the Labour Party in that particular case. And on the point about promises and whether they'll get delivered or not to the lady who made that point and question. I think we have to be aware that, yes, there'll be promises made before the election, and yes, I suspect some of them won't get delivered, I'm afraid. That seems to be the nature of things, but let's hope we see more come to fruition than perhaps has been the case in the past.
Man at the very back in the glasses there, on the end.
Whether she actually has Labour values, or has actually just jumped ship before she loses her job at the end of the year anyway?
Well, certainly she's not going to stand at the next election, so I shall put that question. Yes, in the glasses. So you've got glasses on as well. Yes, in the blue shirt.
From my point of view, I focus, when it comes to voting, I look at the person and then the party. And for most of the, coming back to the gentleman's point about the betrayal, the electorate in Dover would have most likely voted for the party and not the person. And all major parties will have a viable candidate to stand in that area. So isn't it right for the voters of Dover to have a by-election to vote who they want?
I mean, it's a view that you often hear expressed. Of course, generally it doesn't happen. I mean, obviously when Lee Anderson went from Conservative to Reform, there was no by-election. I mean, but yes, I know a lot of people to express your view. Lisa, let me come back to you, because I know you want to respond to what Grace had said. But in terms of the question about Diane Abbott, so Diane Abbott, trailblazer for the Labour Party, longest-serving black woman MP, there's been some kind of investigation going on into comments that she made, which she has apologised for something like a year now. Now, how can that still be going on, and she's not admitted it back into the Labour Party, when Natalie Elphick's admitted in and then she apologises? Well, look, it's a matter of 24 hours.
Yeah, I agree with what you said about Diane. She's someone who has been a good colleague to me. I like her. I admire the impact that she's made. Trailblazer is the word that's most often used to describe her. And
so does that not appear to be a double standard?
Well, look, but you've got to remember why we've got an independent disciplinary process. This is not the same as joining a party. This is about a disciplinary process. And the reason we've got an independent disciplinary process is because under our previous leader, he and his cheerleaders brought the Labour Party to its most shameful time in our history, where the Equality and Human Rights Commission opened an investigation into anti-Semitism in the Labour Party and found that we had become an anti-Semitic party. And the central recommendation of that report, which Keir Starmer took seriously, I take seriously, and the whole of the front bench takes seriously, is that never, ever again will friends or factions of the leadership interfere in disciplinary processes. That's why I have nothing to do with the investigation into Diane, but I very much hope it's resolved quickly.
I mean, a year.
Well, look,
it's not some complicated issue.
I hope it's resolved quickly, but what I would just say in relation to the defection that we've seen in the last 24 hours is this. I very much agree with you that people's constituents should have the right to choose their Member of Parliament and the party that they stand for. But there is one very clear way that that can happen after a series of endless by-elections over the last 12 months, all of which have resulted in the same result. Rishi Sunak could call an election. Natalie Elphicke wants that. The Labour Party wants that. I think the country wants that. The only person who doesn't seem to want that is Keir Starmer. And I just wanted to address the lady's point about promises, because I think this is incredibly important. I think for all political parties, this is the biggest challenge at the next election. And I'm afraid I won't take any lectures from Grace, who was a champion for a manifesto that was fundamentally dishonest at the last election. We had one party going into it saying we can do everything, we can spend all the money in the world and we can deliver absolutely everything, knowing full well that they couldn't. And we had another political party.
Lisa?
Sorry, Grace, you had a long say. And actually, what that did to many working people across this country was rob them of any hope that things could possibly get better, because against that, you had Boris Johnson and these big promises of levelling up that have come to absolutely nothing. So when we say we are going to implement the New Deal for working people, when we say we are going to get Britain building, you can absolutely rest assured that we mean it and that we're going to deliver it.
But Lisa, your kind of visceral hatred of everything that happened during the Corbyn era, and I think this is true of lots of people in the Labour leadership, means that you've looked at that manifesto, seen there was a lot in it, that is true, and just said anything that Corbynism has touched, we can't go near, which means that you have a manifesto that's basically empty.
That's just rubbish.
It's got effectively nothing in it.
I'll give you one example of that. Just last week, we announced that we're going to take our rail franchises back into national ownership as the contracts expire. We're not going to promise to buy them out, because we don't think we should be using people's money to bail out shareholders. It's their money and they haven't got a lot of it. But what we are going to do is put our railways back in public hands for the public good. So I'm afraid that's just not true.
This is what...
Sorry, I know you want to come, but I'm going to bring the audience in as well, if you forgive me. Yes, the man there in the green top.
Just to pick you up on a point, she wasn't wanting a general election. If she wanted a general election, she would have defected to an independent. She wanted publicity. She wanted her point of fame. If she wanted to do it because she believed in it, she would have done it quietly, not at PMQ, not drumming up all the support and everything else behind it. She's an opportunist, and you look bad because you're siding with opportunists, and you're siding as though you'll sell your soul just to win the election. Please don't do that.
Ian, you wanted to come back in, because you asked the question really.
I think that Keir Starmer has done a great job revigorating the Labour Party after the Corbyn era, and they're a force to be reckoned with, I think, now. But this sort of thing is an unwelcome distraction, and we'll hear more about this than what we should be talking about, which is getting the National Health Service back to a good place, and the cost of living crisis. That's where we should be. But this will be a distraction, and I think the Conservatives will jump on it. And I think we should be concentrating on the things that really matter.
Can I just ask, in the interest of balance, whether anyone thinks actually Natalie Elphicke will be an asset to the Labour Party? OK, not a hand has gone up. Lisa, I realise that a lot of this has been coming your way, but I just briefly had... Or do you think she'll be an asset? No, OK, then Lisa, I just wonder how you respond to that.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you how I'd respond to that, because I think that the gentleman in the front row who just talked about the cost of living crisis and the NHS made a really valid point, because that is all I think about when I get up in the morning. I've just been in a school in my constituency this morning who've been waiting 14 years for a new school building, and it's now literally falling down, and they just don't know what they're going to do. They can't get an answer out of the government. It's descended into chaos, and these are the issues that we should be talking about.
Yes,
but
and Ian's saying it's a distraction.
Is that every single time for the last 14 years that we've raised these issues in Parliament, I have walked around those division lobbies and voted for a better NHS, for more police on our streets, for better quality housing and more regulation in the private rented sector, and for investment in our young people. And every single time we've lost. And that's why I say to you that when people are offering to repent of their previous views and come across and take the Labour whip and vote to protect the people that I represent now and every day, between whenever Rishi Sunak gets on and calls that general election, it would be an abrogation of responsibility for me to say absolutely not, because I've got my values and I don't believe that you've got yours. We have to start winning, we have to force a general election, and we have to rebuild this country so that it's in the service of working people again.
All right, I'm going to move on, because there's a few other questions I want to get to that you have asked, but I just want to say before that, next week we're in a rather interesting place politically. I don't know if you've noticed, quite a lot's been happening in Scotland over the last few weeks, and we will be in Aberdeen, to be precise. And the week after that, we're in Coventry. So if, and actually all our remaining locations are on the website. So if you are in or around Aberdeen or Coventry or any of the other locations, go to the website, follow the instructions there, and come and be part of our audience. We would love to see you. Right, Latika Singh, there you are.
Israel is threatening a major invasion of the city of Rafah in Gaza. Is it time for our government to stop arms sales to Israel?
Thank you, Latika. And of course, that's coming on the back of President Biden, who has warned Israel that the US will stop supplying some weapons if Israel launches a major ground operation in Rafah. He said, if they go into Rafah, it's just wrong. I'm not going to supply the weapons and artillery shells. Nigel, is it time for our government to stop arms sales to Israel?
Well, the situation with the US and the UK is different. We actually have an incredibly robust mechanism for international arms sales in the UK. And unlike the US, we are not providing, as the UK government, or supplying arms direct to Israel.
But you do have to approve the licenses that military firms have to apply for in order to be able to export those arms to Israel.
And it's an incredibly robust process.
But so you do have some control, that's all I'm saying.
There is control, and I said there's an incredibly robust process, and when compared to international comparators, actually it stacks up very well as well in terms of robustness. And the US and the UK are very different here. As I said, the volume of arms, we're supplying less than 1%. The US is much, much bigger than that. And let's not forget, you know, there is a right for countries to defend themselves. But the wider point you make about Rafah, we are deeply concerned about a potential military incursion in Rafah. We have expressed these concerns to Israel, in particular the impact that could be on civilians, and of course in terms of aid getting in, because it's a really important area of that country, and we have expressed those concerns to Israel. But as I said, in terms of comparing the US to the UK, they are different beasts when it comes to arms.
Look, before I respond to that, I just want to put this in context. We've got 1.4 million displaced Palestinians in Rafah at the moment, living in tents, having been moved from pillar to post, constantly being told, if you leave and go to the next place, then you will be safe. Many of them have had life-changing injuries. Some of them have experienced amputations without anaesthetic. They are now living in what has been called a man-made famine. There's little clean drinking water, and now their tents are being bombed. And yes, Biden has now said that he is not going to continue to facilitate weapon sales. What we're not hearing about is that a few days ago, Biden actually said he was going to indefinitely delay a report into whether or not Israel has committed human rights abuses. Because if that report had found that Israel had committed human rights abuses, it would effectively have been illegal for the US to continue selling weapons to Israel. I think it's very clear. You know, you've said Israel has the right to defend itself. Rights come with responsibilities. You have the right to defend yourself within international law. It has now become clear that Israel has repeatedly broken international law, and actually that oftentimes that has been cheered on by people from across the political spectrum in this country and in the US.
I mean, the court is looking into that now. They found there are grounds certainly to investigate further, but they've not come down with that conclusion.
Well, yes, but, you know, so many people have died already, and there have been so many people who've been saying this for so long.
You're right. I mean, people have died. I think it's something like 35,000
It's 35,000 people now.
So the question is it
children.
Is it time for our government to stop arms sales to Israel?
Absolutely, categorically. There's no question. You know, if international law means anything as law, then it has to be applied indiscriminately, objectively, to different countries. And when when they've been found to have broken the biggest part of this, which is just don't commit war crimes, they have to be sanctioned. Arms sales have to be stopped.
Even if it's, as President Biden is trying to differentiate, even if it's for the purposes of self-defence, for the Iron Dome, for example, do you think those should be stopped as well?
Yes, if a country has literally committed grave human rights abuses and it is found that that country has undermined international law in doing so, it has not abided by international law, then for international law to mean anything, and we use this a lot of the time when we're talking about rogue states and regimes that we have big problems with, rightly, and, you know, cut off arms sales to and sanction, if that discourse, if the liberal rules-based international order means anything, then Israel has to be sanctioned.
Did you make the same argument to those arming Hamas, who then attacked on the 7th of October?
Of course I would make the same argument about people.
I think we should be...
I personally don't think that we should be supplying weapons to rogue regimes anywhere. You know, we have this alliance with, for example, Saudi Arabia, right, which is also a corrupt regime, and we end up recycling oil sales for weapons through that. I think that is also wrong. You know, I think we need to reduce the amount of weapons that are circulating in the global economy. What we're talking about right now is, are we funding grave human rights abuses that are being committed as we sit here in this room?
Okay. Man there in the black and orange top.
I totally agree with the last speaker. The double standards in Western world is alarming. As we are sitting here, people are dying in Gaza. And as the member of government is saying that it's only 1% that the UK government contributes to the army to Israel, and it's negligible. But can he guarantee the audience that none of those ammunition from Britain has been used in Gaza? Because he insisted on strict protocols, or whatever he called them. Can you guarantee that they have not been used?
But there's a reason for international armaments. And
because when it happens in Russia...
There's a reason for
do you want
international...
Do you want to answer this question? Can you guarantee that none of the weapons, even though it's only 1%, none of the weapons that the UK is supplying through that is agreeing to allow military companies to supply, are being used in Gaza?
But the whole point of the international arms trade, which is legitimate for countries to defend themselves and respond when they're facing harm, of course, military equipment is used and it can be harmful. You know, that's the reality of it. It's a really tough world out there. But I'm sorry, this debate I find ridiculously one-sided at one point. I say we cannot forget what happened on the 7th of October when 1,000+ Israelis and British citizens were killed. And Israel has a right to defend itself. But we also are having robust conversations with our Israeli friends because we want to make sure that they do abide by international rules. And we have said that again and again and again. David Cameron has been out, I think, 11 times to the Middle East in recent times. We are sending these very clear messages. You have a right to defend yourself, but you also must do everything to look after civilians and make sure that we minimise harm.
All right, let me come
But not only, to pick up on Nigel's point, not only were there horrendous acts committed. I mean, 10 times the number of people sitting in this room now were murdered on the October the 7th in cold blood, and double the number of people sitting in this room were taken into Gaza as hostages, and the number of people in this room, as we sit here today, are still held as hostages. And that's the precursor to what's happening there today. And I'm deeply concerned about what is happening in Gaza and what we see on our screens every night, and the risks around Rafah. And I'm very pleased to hear that there's robust discussions going on with Israel, and I think an insistence on Israel providing safe harbour and doing everything that can be done, and more than they've done in the past, in order to look after the citizens of Gaza, who are not to blame in this, is incredibly important in that. But we must not forget the origin and the trigger of the problems we see today there. And we must keep that in balance with the deep concern that I personally feel with the suffering that we see on our screens today in Gaza. That's very important to do.
And in terms of Latika's question, do you think the UK government should follow the example of the US in terms of stopping supplying some weapons if a major ground operation goes ahead?
Well, I'm not aware of which specific weapons the US is stopping. They've got a lot more weapons they're shipping than
well, they've just recently stopped some
They've stopped some big bombs, which
example.
sounds like a very sensible thing to stop doing. I mean, a couple of points on that. I certainly think any weapons that are required for defence and for the Iron Dome, I see no reason why we wouldn't do that. And we saw horrendous attacks on Israel from Iran that were dealt with partly by British and American forces as well, as we saw. And I think defensive weapons should still be allowed to go through. On the broader question, we send very little in terms of armaments to Israel in reality. It's the Americans that do that. As I stand at the moment, I think we should support, in general, the Israeli government in being able to defend themselves against... Remember, Hamas is a proscribed terrorist organisation that has insisted on deciding to eradicate Jews and eradicate Israel. And we've got to remember that when we deal with this. And that's absolutely not the fault of the Palestinian people in general. They deserve more protection than they're getting. I agree with that. We must remember those facts.
Woman there, and yes, in the corner there.
I don't think we've actually forgotten what happened on the Israeli side. I don't think you can forget. But as the gentleman said, it's only 1%. That 1% can kill a family. That 1% can destroy a hospital. 1% is 1% too much, in my eyes.
Lisa?
So I was in Palestine just a few weeks ago, and I don't think you can be there or see any of the images appearing on our TV screens and be in any doubt whatsoever that the Rafah offensive must not go ahead and that this war must be brought to an end.
But do
and
you
that we need an immediate ceasefire
if you were in government now, and obviously we know you want to be, would you stop arms sales to Israel?
And I was about to say that it would be unconscionable if any British parts were used in weapons that were used to kill innocent civilians in Rafah. And I have to say that over the course of this conflict, not taking away any of the horror of the 7th of October, but over the course of the last 7 months, watching the sheer numbers of children killed alone should give us serious pause for thought about whether this war is being conducted in accordance with international law. Now, the UK has a tough arms export licence regime, but there is no clarity from the government right now about whether that's being enforced. That's why we've asked for the legal advice, quite exceptionally, to be published so that we can see whether the government has, in fact, as is rumoured, been advised that the Israeli government is currently breaching international law. And if British parts and weapons are being used in that, then we agree with President Biden that those arms export licences must be immediately suspended. But I would just say this as well, because I get quite depressed, actually, about the state of some of this debate in the United Kingdom. I have been involved in the Palestinian cause for over a decade now and watched the situation on the ground get progressively worse and watch young people in particular lose any hope of any kind of solution. And there are lots of reasons for that, including the failure to hold people accountable for their actions, particularly settlement building, and I agree with Grace on that. But there's another reason too, which is that too many people in this country and around the world treat this that you can pick a side somehow. And you can't pick a side. If you're not horrified by the sight of an Israeli child who's been killed, if you're not horrified by the sight of a Palestinian child who's been killed, then I don't know what to say to you, because there is only one solution to this. And it's a safe and secure Israel alongside a just and dignified
Lisa, we aren't
Palestinian
providing
state.
weapons to Hamas. America
But
is not providing weapons to Hamas.
you have just said, essentially, that Israel doesn't have the right to defend
I
its
have
civilians.
absolutely not
We've
said
got
that.
Hamas
I've said that
firing
rights
rockets into Israel.
come with responsibility.
We've had 500 drone strikes from the Iranians in a matter of hours against Israeli civilians. I care about
Lisa.
that. I care about the children who've been killed in Palestine. And so we've got to take a serious approach to this. Stop selling weapons that are used against innocent civilians. Allow Israel to defend itself against hostile attack and bring the two sides together to achieve a long overdue and badly needed ceasefire.
I feel like in some points over the last kind of, 8-9 months this has been taking place, it feels almost like you're going mad because you hear politicians say over and over again, what's going on is unconscionable, it's all terrible, and we should do things in accordance with human rights, whilst allowing Israel to get away with just more and more and more every time. We're having this conversation now where these people have been pushed to the very, very end of where they could be pushed.
I don't know who you're arguing with.
Well,
because
Lisa,
I've just told you.
You yourself said
I've just
immediately.
Told you.
You
there must
said,
be accountability. We support the ICJ ruling.
You said
we support
when
the ICC.
I think it was maybe a month or two after the October 7th
Hang on,
event.
don't both talk at the same time.
Sorry.
Make your point now.
You said not long after the October 7th event happens that you weren't sure the extent to which international law could be applied in this case.
No,
that I find shocking. That is what is reported.
Yeah, it was reported on Twitter, Grace, and it's not the real world.
I saw that reported in a number of news sources.
I'm sorry,
you didn't say that.
But this is, when I have been in the region 3 times in the last 6 months, having difficult conversations, robust conversations with the Israeli government, with the Palestinian Authority, with all of the interlocutors who are trying to reach a negotiation to get the hostages out, get aid in and bring this war to a close.
Why did you not speak out against Keir Starmer saying...
Hang on.
When Keir Starmer said Israel has the right to cut off water and power, which is a war crime, why did you not speak out against that, Lisa?
Because he didn't, and you know that he didn't. And you're just peddling this over and over again when he's clarified exactly what he said and what he meant.
Hang on.
You've had a very long say about this, and you've said several things that are just completely untrue. And I tell you, the one thing you are not doing is helping to bring this to a close. If I talked the way that you talked in such casual terms about the right of Israelis to security,
I'm not talking in casual terms at all.
We would not get people into the room, and we would not protect those children in Gaza.
I'm just going to draw this to a close. Forgive me, Grace, but simply because this is becoming a dialogue between you two, and I appreciate how strongly you both feel. But actually, this is for everybody else as well. Let me just take a couple more points. I mean, I didn't want to stop because I know you feel so strong. Let me take a couple more points, and then I'm going to move on. Yes, the woman in the blue and white shirt with the specs on.
Yeah. I think you might have a very short memory to when the Iraq war, that wasn't our war, got involved, and that was a Labour government that brought us into that war, and we lost thousands of our army in that war. So I think you have a very short memory regarding that.
Okay. Man here in the red suit.
Hi. And I think the October the 7th was awful, but 2 wrongs don't make a right. So, I think something has to be done. And I totally agree that Israel should be defending themselves, but come on, it's been going on for that long. And just like you're saying, there's so many people died there, innocent people.
Okay. Now, I'm going to draw this to a close, not because it's not something that is worth talking about. It absolutely is. But I know, sadly, I'm pretty sure we'll be coming back to it. So I'm going to draw this to a close for now and take another question from Lee Mollart.
Stoke-on-Trent was awarded £56 million in 2021 to help with levelling up. It's now summer 2024, and all I've seen is a multi-storey car park flattened and another one has been built. When will we see some levelling up in Stoke-on-Trent?
We had lots of questions about this. Oh, my goodness. We had a lot of questions about this, as we did last time we were in Stoke-on-Trent, I remember. It was Chris Philp, your colleague, who was on that day. So, yes, Stoke-on-Trent was awarded £56 million in 2021. £34 million of that hasn't been spent so far. Here we are in 2024. Nigel, I'm obviously going to come to you, but Humphrey, I just want to come to you. I mean, you grew up in Staffordshire.
Yep.
I know you've got a couple of gyms here in Stoke. Levelling up benefits?
Well, as I look around the country as a whole, and I travel around the country, Stoke-on-Trent and elsewhere, it's clear that we need significant amounts of investment to bring greater vibrancy and restore some of the former sort of grandeur that great cities like Stoke-on-Trent and across the Midlands and the north of England have. So, we need to see much more of that. I remember some rather fine car parks in Stoke-on-Trent from my youth, I think, but I think you want more than car parks from that. I think you want civic spaces, you want environmental improvement. But here I think we face one of the challenges that government has. I mean, I spend my life rolling things out in our business across the country, opening new sites, and the discipline and follow-through. I can't imagine having a plan to spend £56 million and 3 years later only having spent about 20 of it. If we had a plan to spend £56 million, we would have done it and we would have put it to good use. I think one of the great challenges for government in general is maintaining the momentum of getting things doing, and I very much hope that we'll see Stoke-on-Trent benefiting from that money, because that money, it's a great city. It was a great city to be a part of when I lived in South Staffordshire, and we used to come here regularly, so I hope that'll be seen here in the future.
So, Nigel, let me come to you. I mean, this is a refrain that we often hear on Question Time in the sort of red wall towns and cities particularly. I mean, for example, in Stoke, and you can correct me if I've got this wrong, there were plans for a £70 million, huge 3,600-seater arena. There's a big development called the Truston Square, isn't it? You'll be familiar with it. That's been shelved because it was too expensive. Then there were plans for a car park, £20 million. Gosh, they're expensive, aren't they? That has been shelved too. There has been another car park built. I mean, there have been some other things, but the feeling I'm getting from lots of the questions that were submitted by you is where's all the benefit going? They're not seeing it.
Yeah. Look, and these things take time. There's no doubt about it. But I don't think there's any doubt. And I've spoken to.
You've had 14 years. Someone shouted
there. Your three MPs here, Jonathan, Jack, and Joe, about this as well, who are great champions of Stoke. And look, you did have, and you have had, not only Levelling Up funds, but Transformation Cities Fund, Heritage Action Zones funds, and all sorts of other things. These things don't happen overnight. They do take time. You mentioned that 30-something has not been spent yet, but lots of it is in process. I think literally just around the corner from here, the old goods yard, that is in progress. That is visible. That is happening. And there's other projects as well, Spode site in Longton, other initiatives, the Kids Grove initiatives, the sports centre there as well, which was closed by the Labour Council in 2017. That's now been reopened, refurbished because of the money. So, yes, I get the frustration if you're not seeing it. But levelling up is real. It is happening. It is important because you need it. Because the reality is, as many of you know, Labour took you for granted for too long. They just took your votes for granted and thought you're going to vote for them anyway. And it's not the case. It's really, really important that we invest in areas like Stoke and other areas right across the country.
But I think you probably don't need to tell them that it's really important to invest. I know, I think they know that already.
But some of it, I mean, even by the very nature of the question, I say 20-something million has already been spent and is being invested, and most of the other projects are in progress. But it does take time. It doesn't happen overnight. That's what levelling up is all about. It is a long-term transition, changing the whole nature and distribution of the UK economy so that other parts of the country, other than the South East and London, can generate economic activity as well. And if you look at the stats around here as well, you, for all your hard work, have done a great job. The dynamic nature of the local economy, how unemployment has more than halved since 2010. In fact, 800 jobs a day have been generated across the country since we've been in power. All of these things are important. Levelling up is part of that process, along with a whole host of other things. But I get the frustration, but I can tell you your MPs are laser focused on making sure that they deliver. The council has a role as well here and are not always helpful in terms of speeding things along. But it's really important we keep going because it is needed. It's needed in Stoke and it's needed in other parts of the country.
Well, let's hear from the good people of Stoke who are here. Yes, in your fabulous red necklace. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Fiona. I just wanted to say we almost nearly got an HS2 as well. I'd just like to say now that that project's been scrapped, Who in the government is going to be held accountable for that? And for the people who had a compulsory purchase order on their premises, that then now I walk past them every time I do my 10,000 steps every evening, that are now going derelict. So who's going to be accountable to that in your party?
Yeah. Well, a lot of that money has been reallocated and a specific amount has been allocated
Where,
to Stoke
in potholes
and also
in the road?
rest. Well, there's potholes, there's bursts, there's other transport systems as well, because, again, that is needed. And I was an advocate for HS2, but I recognise that actually the ROI, the return on investment, didn't stack up, and there are alternative ways of spending that money. Every single penny of HS2 money will be reinvested, and it will be spread, again, in the Midlands and the North in a very effective way where those projects will happen. But again, I get the frustration.
All right, too little, too late, you're saying. The man in the blue shirt.
When we talk about levelling up, we talked about the arena, we talk about car parks. There's loads of derelict land around Stoke-on-Trent, and why it's taking time, I understand that, but we've still got veterans and people living on our streets with no accommodation.
Yeah.
And the man further back, you've also got a blue shirt with glasses, yeah.
I'm sorry. Half of what you said doesn't make sense. You said you started off with Stoke and you said that 20 million have not been used in about 3 years. Okay? And then you went about saying what the Tories have been done. We've given Boris a chance, he lied. We gave Liz a chance, she trashed the economy. Now we've got an unelected Prime Minister. And we just want a general election. And we want it now, please.
Nigel, I'm going to come back to you. Lisa, the people here want to see levelling up benefits. Easier to talk about than to deliver. Is this something Labour can genuinely do?
Yes, we can, but you've got to be serious about what levelling up is. It isn't little pots of cash handed out for leisure centres and car parks, things that are cooked up in Whitehall by people hundreds of miles away who've never set foot in the communities where we're somehow supposed to be grateful for these small gifts back. And it isn't the contrick of taking millions of pounds away from councils and then handing a small amount back and telling people that they should applaud the government for doing so. What it is a long-term plan to get good jobs back into communities across the country again. I represent Wigan. It's a former mining town, and we are immensely proud of the contribution that we make to the world. And last time I was here in Stoke, I was left in absolutely no doubt that you feel the same about the ceramics industry and have seen far too many jobs offshored in recent years. If we want to repair our high streets, if we want to reboot our economies, we've got to get money back into people's pockets, and that means good jobs in every part of the country. And for me, this is just a basic question of respect. Just as it's disrespectful to tour the country handing out little pots of cash for things we never asked for and we wouldn't have spent it on either, denying our local leaders the chance to make those decisions with their communities, just as it's disrespectful to do that, it's also disrespectful to write off the contribution that we've got to make to our national economy in every part of the country. You won't find many people in Wigan who want to reopen the coal mines and want that future for their kids, but we're proud of that contribution. And what we want now is the investment to get the clean energy jobs that rely on the same engineering skills that we've still got in abundance in my town in order to power us through the future and help us make that contribution again. So for us, levelling up is about respect for the priorities that people have, devolving powers to local leaders to be able to have control over their own local economies and the way that their own money is spent. It's your money, not ours,
some of these are
and you should be spent it. And an industrial strategy to get money back into, to get good jobs back into communities.
Councils applying for specific things to spend the money on.
Well, councils are forced to bid into a pot of central government funding.
And one of the for specific things in many instances.
For specific things that come with government criteria attached. And if you want to know why most of that money that was promised to Stoke hasn't been allocated, it's because of two things. It's because this stringent criteria that was attached to those projects meant they had to be delivered by 2024. What did we think was going to happen in 2024? A general election. So lots of the projects that councils wanted to do weren't eligible. But it's also because of two words, Liz Truss. Because when she disastrously crashed the economy, the cost of all these projects went through the roof. And many of them that communities have spent years putting together were no longer viable.
Lisa,
if there was ever a sign that it is time for change, levelling up are the two words that tell you
Lisa,
that this is
I'm sorry, there's two things here. First of all, and in response to some comments you made earlier on, criticising Jeremy Corbyn, you did serve under his shadow team, and Keir Starmer actually also, of course, wanted him to be Prime Minister for 2 years. So try not to say so much distance. And secondly, every single Labour government, as you know, has ended up with unemployment higher at the end than they started. So I wouldn't go lecturing on crashing the economy. You do that every time you're in government, without exception.
I would be very careful about trashing other people's economic record.
Let me let Grace in, because I want to get one more question. So, Grace.
Sure. So, look, we are one of the most regionally unequal economies in all OECD, all advanced economies. And that has real-world implications. And it's not just about, you know, car parks or whatever else we've been talking about. The gap in healthy life expectancy between a girl born in one of the poorest regions in the UK, the poorest areas of the UK, and the richest is 20 years. For boys, it's 19 years. So if you're, you know, a little girl born in a poor area, you're going to have 20 years less of a healthy life than someone born in the richest parts of the country. And that requires investment to change. The thing I'm really excited about, actually, and this is something that has been going on for a long time, and indeed since before Keir Starmer became leader, is this thing called the Preston model. And this is something that Matthew Brown is trying in Preston Council, and it's called the Community Wealth Building Agenda. And what that recognises is that people need, you know, money, local areas need money to get things done, but they also need power. And that doesn't just mean power going to cities and local authorities, it means power to communities. So the Community Wealth Building Agenda is basically saying, how do we use the local budget to boost jobs, to raise wages? How do we align all the public institutions to make sure that our procurement budgets are being used to the best effect? Can we do things like create local banks? Can we support the cooperatives in our area? This is like real grassroots democracy. And it's something I'm really excited about. And I want to see commitments from everyone, actually, to say this should be bread and butter for everyone, for Labour, for the Conservatives, hand power back to people, because people are angry at feeling disempowered at the centralisation of our democracy.
OK. We have got about 8 minutes left, which is far too short a time to deal with the next question in great detail, but I want to try and get a bit of it. So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds each. OK, Steve Morris, where are you?
With the NHS waiting lists at over 7.5 million, should there be a hybrid scheme between the NHS and private funding on a similar basis to, say, the Australian Medicare system?
So Australia, where quite a few of our doctors seem to be going in recent times. So they have a combination, Australia, of government funding and private health insurance. It's basically have a hypothecated tax, a tax specifically for healthcare and private insurance as well. You could talk about this at great length. Very briefly, Nigel.
Very briefly. Look, the model we've got in the UK is, I think, a fairly well-established and accepted one. And there's a reason why we're all, genuinely all, proud of the NHS, because it's free at the point of use. And that is an established principle that I don't think any major political party is proposing to move from. It doesn't mean to say, though, that there can't be a role for the private sector in the NHS. In fact, there was under Labour governments. They increased it a lot, and there will be under ours, and there is under ours as well. But in terms of, you know, productivity and expenditure, I do think it's important to remember that things are improving. Waiting lists are coming down. The strikes didn't help. 1.3 million
Not in the last month, they haven't. The waiting lists are about the same as they were last month.
Waiting lists have gone down now for 6 months in a row.
No, the waiting lists this month, the figures came out today, as you know, are about the same as last month.
The waiting
Are you disputing that?
My understanding is the waiting list has been coming down now for 6 months, and also the long-term
It's about the same as it was last month, but OK.
But I think it's important that we focus on inputs and outputs in the NHS. And I say, currently, it's about £160 billion. That's up about a third, £40 billion in real terms since we came in. But there's increasing demands on the NHS. We need to increase the productivity in the NHS as well. There's all sorts of things, but we're all proud of the NHS.
Should there be a hybrid scheme? I mean, other countries have, there are other countries. Europe have it. Denmark has it, for example. Healthcare is funded by taxation, but you can also take out an insurance system as well.
And as you may know, we have a substantial business in Denmark, so I see that operating on a day-to-day basis. I have some personal experience and exposure to this. One of my sons is a doctor up in Blackburn, and I see the remarkable work that he and his colleagues do with and for the NHS. But in direct answer to your question, I find it hard to see how we won't have to not just accept but embrace some evolution of the NHS for it to be able to serve you, me, and all of us in the way we'd want to be served by healthcare in this country over time. And there's one very important piece within this that often gets hidden, is I think, and I see this directly with my son, I think the way, because the NHS is a monopoly employer, the only way you can qualify as a doctor in the UK is with the NHS. The first 20 years of your career, you effectively have to spend within the NHS. That means that some of the terms and conditions, and to be quite honest, the pay that our nurses and our doctors get is simply not good enough. And not enough to stop them from going to Australia, as you said, Fiona, and to stop us.
So you think a
having to
hybrid
import
system
people.
would resolve that?
And I
to a certain
think if you
extent,
create
do
a hybrid system that involves other paths to qualification, we can increase the number of nurses and doctors, and we'll be able to improve their conditions, and more
All
of
right.
them will stay.
I'm only
within
rushing you because we haven't got much time.
Understood.
So Lisa, according to the Office of Budget Responsibility, in 2024-25, the government expects to spend over 40% of its day-to-day spending on the NHS. Is that sustainable?
Well, it depends what you're spending the money on, and one of the problems that I see...
40%, is that
one of the
sustainable in any way?
Well, look, I believe in an NHS free at the point of use, and that's what you can expect to see under Labour. But I go into my local hospital regularly. I was in there a couple of days ago. One of the biggest problems that we've got is that we've got lots of people who are currently stuck in hospital. They go into hospital often because they can't get a GP appointment, and then they can't come out because they can't get social care. So if you're serious about reforming and supporting the NHS, we need GPs to modernise. We need them to be offering appointments at times that people can get them. We need a cross-party commission on social care to take the politics out of it, which has sunk those reforms over and over again. And we've all got to come together and sign up to solve that problem. And we need to expand the workforce, because, it's right to mention pay. It's absolutely right to say that for many nurses, doctors and auxiliary staff, porters, cleaners, they've seen real terms pay cuts. But every single time I go into my local hospital, what people are really talking about is the workload pressures and the fact that they didn't come in to the profession in order to just treat people at the end of life. They want to save their lives. So we've got to get serious about doing that, and we've got a plan to do it.
OK, Lisa, I'm sorry to cut you off. So, Grace, to that point in terms of staff, so the NHS in England employs 1.7 million people, 1 in 17 of all workers in England. And it's estimated, according to the NHS, its own long-term workforce plan. In another 10 years, we're going to need 2.5 million staff with the NHS system we've got. Do you think we should stick with it?
Look, if you want to bring down costs in the NHS, invest in prevention, invest in social care, invest in public health, stop people from getting sick before they get there. There's a small number of people who are suffering from some really complex and difficult problems, who have fallen through the net, quite frankly, because of austerity, because of cuts to social care and the systems that are supposed to catch them early, and that is unforgivable. So we need investment if we want to actually cut down costs over the long term.
But stick with the same system.
Well, yes, and one thing I want to end on is that there's a paper published in The Lancet, so the most kind of prestigious medical journal in the UK, that found that greater involvement of private companies in the NHS corresponded with more people dying of treatable causes. I'll end on that.
OK, I don't know about the report, so I have no idea if you're quoting that correctly or not. The man in the glasses in the check shirt, yeah.
Nigel, I think it's rich you can say about the amount you're investing at this point. If you wanted to invest, you would have done it over 14 years, not just now. The levels you're putting in are not appropriate to the amount of damage that has been done.
There's more doctors, nurses and investment in NHS than ever before, and it's been increasing over the last 14 years.
Lived experience of people in the NHS is not what you're saying it is, and that's what people are suffering with.
OK, the woman, I'm going to get round the audience, forgive me, because I've given you all quite a bit of time. The woman in the pink check shirt, yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Nigel, you say about the waiting lists have dropped by for the year and the 6 months. How many people on those waiting lists have died whilst waiting for operations and treatment? Is that why the waiting list has dropped down? Because they waited that long?
Look, as I said, there's more services, there's more people being treated by the NHS than ever before. It's really important that we do fund it. We have been funding it. I say it's at the heart of all major parties' policies. And by the way, the Labour Party is not proposing any additional spending, despite what they may be trying to suggest this evening.
Let me hear one more
so
point.
it's really important that we focus on inputs and outputs.
Yes, you've made that point. The woman in the red dress there.
I'm a clinical pharmacist, and we need more transparency. There are some treatments that are just not available on the NHS, and people have an expectation when they go to hospital that they're going to get treated with all treatments available to them. They're not. there's a budget, and the budget is spent, and people need to understand that if you have a certain condition, there will be a range of treatments available to you, but that might not be what the whole range of treatments that's available to you. And my dad died of bowel cancer. He was not eligible on the NHS for the medication that he thankfully had private medical insurance. He could have that treatment because his company gave him private. But we had no idea that he gets cancer, he goes to hospital, and actually you can't have that treatment because the NHS isn't funding it.
Okay. Well, I'm glad he did get treatment, and thank you for telling us about that. Sorry, folks, our hour is up. I'm really sorry. We had to really rush that, and I regret that. We've kind of ran out of time. Levelling up was something you want to talk about a lot, so I gave that a bit more time. Thank you to Ian Knight and Ian Williamson, who have supplied the photographs of Stoke for us today. Great to see those. That's it from us here in Stoke-on-Trent. Until next week, when we'll be in Aberdeen. See you then. Bye-bye.
Bloody hell. The only person I agreed with in that audience was the fucking fella who said, hurry up and give us an election. I mean, I'm bored anyway. I just want an election. So just see me bored and ass fucking shows. Well, I don't mean question time, you know what question is, but whatever. But seriously, give us an election already. These Tories are terrible. Like really, they are. Shite. Anyway, I will see you on Sunday. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, etc. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe, you tramps. Cheerio.